all right? My name's Dean Wagner, and I'm from the National Mediation Board. That's all right. We're a very small government agency, and I was asked to come here and describe our adoption of Google technologies. We did it over a period of a couple of years. We're not here, we don't have nothing to promote or a website to go to or friends. You don't have to follow us on anything, okay? So I'm just going to describe first what the National Mediation Board was, what our requirements were, how we looked at some of the alternatives, our subset of Google technologies that we picked up, and then some of the lessons learned. It's not revolutionary, but it was an interesting journey. Okay, so the National Mediation Board, what we do is we mediate labor disputes in the railway and the airline industries. We handle grievances from workers. We also facilitate and train people on how to do conflict resolution. We're very small. We're what's called a micro agency. We're less than 60 people, and then we also have a crew of contract arbitrators. There's 500 of them that are registered, probably 50 that are really active, but 300 that actually do work on a year-to-year basis. We're very resource limited. This is not the best chart in the world. Again, we're not promoting anything, so we don't have a marketing department. But we have the outside public. Because we're a government agency, we have to respond to FOIA requests. We have to have a website that gives information to workers about what they can do. We have what we call a knowledge store, which is a public database of labor contracts and negotiation documents that go back to the 1930s. We have legal submissions from the carriers and the unions. And all this is done, of course, electronically. We have to store documents. That's a record keeping is a big issue in the government. You don't have to keep them forever. You just have to keep them until the end of the republic, right? So it's not much. Then there's e-discovery. We have accounting and that sort of problem. And then we have a lot of case management. We have probably, well over 5,000 open cases at any one time and people working on them. Let's see, we've got almost everybody working in the field. Our mediators are all in the field constantly. All of the arbitrators are in the field. We all telecommute. There's really only about 10 people in the office. In 2011, this is what our hardware network looked like, all right? This doesn't include, the software stacks inside it or anything like that. So it's a very small place, but we had hardware in 5 different locations. We had a data center at our office. We had a email server that we leased out in Reston. We had a backup email server in Denver. We're required to have a continuing operations backup, which was also in Denver. And then the records were kept on 5 servers in Vancouver. It didn't dawn on anybody that that's outside of the United States. But that's Canadian, so what the heck. But, and that's where we kept our records, and that was a very expensive service. We leased software, we leased support and the servers, and it was almost $20,000 a month. So it was pricey. Now, what happened at the same time was we were faced with a lot of challenges. There were increasing security requirements. There were increasing requirements with mobility and a bunch of other things. And the government was coming down with a bunch of actions. They had a federal data center consolidation program where you had to justify having your small data center. They had the trusted internet connection, still a very big issue, which was going to require us to buy a lot of additional hardware for each one of those physical sites. There was FedRAMP was a new thing. They had the White House Cloud First initiative, and of course, everybody was going mobile, and then they started to bring their own devices. In addition, we had a number of constraints, budget constraints. We had the sequester was coming in. They cut our budget by 8% just across the board without thinking about it. And, not in inflated terms, but in real terms, and have since cut it afterwards. Of course, the security compliance, everything, we had to do all of this and continue to comply with all the security requirements. And then we had very limited resources and skills. We had contracted out most of our IT work and our systems admin, and everything was contracted out. We were good at managing contracts, and we had sort of technical, fluency. So we looked at it and we said, well, what can we do? We could possibly upgrade our existing data center and network. That was really, it's impossible for us at the time. We didn't have the resource to do it. That was impossible. Well, we could rent space from another agency's data center that was already compliant. We looked into that. It wouldn't work because that was also equally expensive, and it left us with our network in place. So we still had to do all the things to our little network. We would just be pushing a little bit of it out. We could do some kind of a hybrid, which most of the vendors really loved this, because this was just a lot more contracting. So then we'd have cloud problems, and we'd still have all of the network problems. So we said, well, could we do it in 100% in the cloud? I mean, that was the question. Could we actually just go there? And that doesn't sound so strange today, although there's still cloud deniers. But in 2011, it was actually kind of brave, we thought. So we started to experiment. We started to experiment with commercial off-the-shelf software as a service. We hired some people to write custom solutions for us. They generally picked the cloud themselves and what technologies they would use and things like that. We at one time had the public document server project. We had an experimental basis. It was Ruby on Rails running on an instance in Amazon with a MySQL database and a Solr text, indexing engine, which we had to back up with a couple more instances and things like that. None of that actually went successfully for us. What happened was kind of strange. We had a number of deadlines that had to be met. And I was sort of a part-time Java programmer, and we said, well, maybe we could just do a proof of concept on the Google App Engine. It looks like it's pretty easy. In fact, what had happened is as a hobbyist, we had done a thing with, what was that called? It was I forget the name of the Python framework that it was. Py2Web or something like that. I can't remember. Anyway, you could export it right up to the App Engine and it just worked. All right, so we tried that. And what happened was, we went into production with the first application that we did that was actually just supposed to be a proof of concept. And then we started to say, well, maybe we could go 100%. So this chart became fairly key, and to us it was really important. We had ruled out the idea, well, first off, to just explain it. There were several divisions back then. It was the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And then with a data center, you didn't get any service. So the red part of this chart represents the technical and security responsibility that we would be assuming, all right? And we had started out with the assumption that infrastructure as a service was the way to go. And that's because when we looked at the Amazon diagrams, the little icons appeared to look a lot like the hardware that we knew and loved. And we could understand the idea of getting a load balancer. Auto-scaling was something new, a few other things like that. But it was very understandable to us. It was very understandable to the people who had been doing our systems admin. We didn't understand the rest of it so much. But what we had just fallen into was platform as a service was where our prototype was running. Well, in the end, and then the security problems were very big. The end conclusion of all of this was we had to throw away all of our old conceptions about system administration. And what we think now is that you always do an exhaustive search for a software as a solution problem from an operation standpoint. And if you're forced to, then you go back to platform as a service. And we have not found an application yet where we need to go to infrastructure as a service. So in my opinion, if the contractor is coming to you, or if you're a developer and you're proposing to somebody, and you're saying, well, we want to run it, on infrastructure as a service, it's your responsibility to justify why that happens, because my first bias would be, you must be doing something wrong if you have to spin up, virtual machines in order to get this thing to run, unless you have some incredibly special requirement. Most applications don't have it. And and another example is, there are companies now that make a very good business riding on top of software as a service. There's lots of large companies out there that will configure your Salesforce for you. So I think most of the world is moving out to that end. There's going to be a few brilliant people at Google that run the infrastructure for us. All those system admin people should be training for other jobs right now, because that's where it's going. And the other thing that's happening, of course, is that the nuts and bolts are beginning to disappear, and the people who are really important out here are the creative types, or they're the people who understand the process really well. And that's the big transition. I talked so long, I lost the flipper. There it is. All right, so our first step was to just go to the normal Google apps. And we did that early. We installed some other software in order to keep us up. The Google Cloud is a FISMA moderate authority to operate. So if you don't have data that's more sensitive than that, you can just use it as is. Because we got that, we had the app engine. Because we had the app engine, we experimented, and things went on. When we finally drank the Kool-Aid, this is what happened. We went out and found some other agencies that would do a couple of functions. Of course, Google Apps did a great deal. And then we basically did in-house development for 2 types of records repositories and 3 types of case management systems. And right now, we're actually expanding, and we now think that there are other applications that we can do that are more interesting and more fun, because it's turned out to be pretty easy to do this. Now that compares to, this is just the software modules and not even complete stacks, right? But not too long before that, we had all this stuff going on. And that's just the hardware block diagram. Of course, if you haven't done it already, if you've got one of those apps fired up, instead of system admin, somebody like me can once a week or so check the dashboard, see how the app was going, and I can do that from home when I'm telecommuting or anything else. Not a big deal. So we've got about 10 different projects running. We look at them, adjust them as needed. That application that cost us $20,000 a month, which included a lot of personnel and things like that, is now running for about $10 a month. So our records repositories, just real quick, there are 2 front ends. There's an upload front end. If you've got, we've got about 500,000 documents in our public library of documents. Which go from anything from a little PDF to, a huge TIFF, scan of a labor document from 1938 or videos from some conference and things like that. We have a whole bunch of things in the repository. We have an upload client where they have to type in the little metadata and show what file is going to be uploaded. It goes off to a web front end in the app engine, and that passes it to a task queue. And the task queue does a couple of things. It takes the file and puts it into the proper bucket. When we have buckets arranged by the security policy. And we also do text indexing on everything. We run our own text indexing and use the service that Google provides to later look that up. Then there's a client. They were both AngularJS clients and still are, I think. The client has a search handlers, and it goes against the text engine. They find the document, and that's what they get. It's that simple, right? But again, it runs very cheaply, and we were able to do it ourselves. This is something I'd rather buy off the shelf from somebody. So if there's developers out there that would like to do that, a U.S. government compliant records repository is something you could build. So we have 2 applications that basically follow this structure. And then we have the case management systems, which usually have three kinds of users. They have, the user, which would be an arbitrator or a mediator or something like that. They have a staff person or a lawyer, and then they have managers. And we went through several phases on the clients. We've tried to limit everything to pseudo-RESTful services. I'm not sure we're following the rules all the way. And then we write standard HTML clients. So we went through a jQuery phase, we went through an AngularJS phase, and now we're writing our first one in Polymer. But here, it's mostly data. We use the data store. We use the email service, which we spin things off of one of the front ends are only good for about 30 seconds of work. So it's got, and if you run over, then it just fails. So in that 30 seconds, any long task you spin off to a task queue. So one of the task queue here, we generate our emails in a task queue. Before we did text editing and things like that. We run cron jobs in the App Engine, and then we use the Google authentication service. It'd be great if we had problems like, I'd love to play with the image surface. I'd love to play with, the big data service and things like that. We just don't have interesting problems, This is our next architecture, and I'm really having a good time with this. All right, we've got, this is very generic, obviously, but we've got a user, and we're going with straight Polymer in the client. And I mean straight Polymer. We're not using any libraries at all. And then we're connecting it to a Firebase backend as a service. We still use the App Engine, but the App Engine is there to run cron jobs and other more complicated problems, mostly cron jobs, frankly. The Firebase is a RESTful service. It does it real time. It sets up a service worker, a WebSocket connection. It is just wonderful and very simple, and it made it very easy. Polymer allows us to really modularize the inside of the client, and I really do think it's the future of the web. And what this has allowed us to start experimenting with is contracting out very small pieces of our project. So we can set up a project, and then we can say, gosh, we have a really ugly, this form is just really ugly. It's a single web component. We've created it in the seed element package that they give, which includes a demo and tests. Here's the API as it's defined. This is how it relates to the rest of the page. Here's your test routines. We want something prettier now, and we can actually contract that out separately without having to worry about it, and then they just swap it out later. We swap it out by changing the version in our bower.json file, and if it runs, then we have to rebuild it because we vulcanize. I'm sorry if this is Polymer intensive, but we've got so many Polymer elements in our clients that they just really, they're very slow if somebody's loading it for the first time. So we vulcanize it, and it concatenates them all into one big file, and it works like a champ then. So with the App Engine, which we can modularize, because even those task queues, we could contract those separately. We upgraded our text extraction recently, because it wasn't pulling the text out of, what we had wouldn't pull the text out of Microsoft Docs and a few other formats that well. So we contracted with a separate developer who was very good at Python, and we said, here's what you're going to get. It's going to have an address of the document in the bucket. It's going to have this metadata, and it needs to put, this text, it has to give this text back, right? Basically. And, 3 weeks later, he came up with a module. We swapped it out, and off the App Engine ran. That's it. So this is our new architecture. I think we're probably going to try to rewrite everything into this, frankly. Whoops. Now, the results of this operational change is that we have had a massive reduction in our cost for IT. In fact, the sequester, I like to take credit for softening the blow of sequester budget cuts in our agency. I mean, we dropped the cost of IT. When you turn the power off, because those physical locations didn't just have computers, and they had air conditioners, they had everything, right? And all of that just went away. In fact, I think our bill with Google right now is probably less than the electricity bill for our data center was.
You measured your carbon footprint reduction?
Well, there you go, carbon footprint reduction, yeah.
I
I think that we should put that in the annual report, right? Yeah. But we got, regretfully, some of our system admin contractors did not have their contracts renewed because we didn't need them anymore. Things like that. I think we actually increased our security. I think, people were worried about security in the day. I do not worry about the security in the cloud up to FSMA Moderate. And FSMA Moderate, just for a reference, is roughly the same level that you would use for medical information or personal identifying information. So there are a lot of applications. And then, of course, the roles are shifting. We used to be system admins, and then now we've turned into developers. We're still learning that, but the fact is that we found that the real win now is in the user experience and process knowledge. So we're trying to beef up on that, and maybe we can just contract that out, which wouldn't be so bad either. Yeah.
In terms of developers, do you have more in-house developers and contracted developers?
We have 2 in-house developers. That's me.
Developer and then who else?
And Charlie right there. Charlie. The 2 of us are doing it. And that was not because we didn't want to hire people, but we didn't have the budget to hire people is the reason.
Do you think you might go out and hire contractors?
That would be the mode I'd like to get into, yeah.
Task Individual tasks.
Individual tasks, yeah. And then the other problem, we experimented with ways to contract agilely, and the government is having a hard time with that. There are a lot of people trying to do it, but it's difficult right now. So to be agile, we'd almost have to bet on one guy. We can't do it sprint by sprint, but you could say, we've got 3 months worth of agile work, and if, for you or 2 guys or your team or whatever it is, and if it doesn't work out, don't renew the contract or something. I'm not quite sure how to do that, but we want to be more task-oriented and more agile. And hopefully we could develop a relationship with a few people that would do that. Now, one of the things that we did, and maybe, how do you think that's on the next slide? So contracting and maintenance has become a lot easier, I think, and it is modular and decoupled, and we try to enforce that. The other thing that we do is limit the technologies, because that helps us in our maintenance and in our contracting. So when we say, you can use Polymer in the client, otherwise, you need permission to add anything else to the client right now. Because we used to do Angular, and we were pretty good at it, but now we've forgotten, and we're not going to learn it again. All right? For instance, and on the app engine, it's Python. Yes, I almost didn't make it because I was over next door listening to Go. I like Go as a language. Boy, when I retire, I'm going to study Go maybe. But right now, it's Python. We're going to use Python, and that's all, because we can all understand Python very easily, and we can find a lot of developers that do, and it runs just great. So that's, and then, a few other things, we specify the interfaces between the app engine modules and that. And if we say it's going to be Firebase, it's going to be Firebase. And that helps us to maintain it and also pass it on to the guys that are going to follow on behind us. Although I suspect that within, 5 years' time or so, there will not be a need for an agency like us to have custom software. I would think that the industry will have created enough off-the-shelf stuff that we could just adapt it to our needs. And then, of course, improving UX is our next challenge, again, contracting, testing the work product, which it's dawned on me recently that we don't exactly know how to measure whether or not a UX contractor has done their job. So we might want to get better at user testing in order to measure before and after. So, it'd be a great subject to talk about. I don't know how to do it right now. I'd like to do a shout out to these 2 groups. So 18F, Digital Gov. Has anybody here heard of 18F? I think they're fantastic, and they have really helped the other agencies, and they're spreading the word about good UX in particular, but good practices in general, and also Digital Gov. So if you ever have a moment, go ahead and check out their sites. There are a lot of resources there, and I know 18F is actually hiring people. Well, that's it. Any questions? Yes.
If you look at the public interaction with your site,
Hmm.
do you have any measures or metrics on any growth from the public side or any response to that world?
No, I don't have any metrics on that. I don't think it's grown. There's a sort of a small subculture that researches labor law, and we're sort of like the leading resource for that, but it's a very small club. Our public website is viewed by a lot of individuals, especially when there's strike activity or something like that. So that'll drive our website traffic. We'll get a big spike if, you know, United Airlines is thinking about striking or something, yeah. But we have not measured any difference because we changed our website is running on the App Engine too now.
On the UX testing, if you're not familiar with the podcast, The Web Ahead, the next episode, 106, is talking about user experience and testing user experience.
Is that the web ed?
The Web Ahead.
A web ahead, okay.
They had a screw up with the podcast. They got 206 posted online, 205. Well, I've heard, or 106 or 105, I've heard 106, it's not up there yet.
Okay.
But they were talking to a fellow who's publishing books on how to test user experience.
All right, we're going to deploy that Polymer Firebase app in October 1st. After that, I'm going to look at UX.
There's someone other than USDS who actually literally wrote the book on usability testing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't so much want to do usability testing as I want to be able to test what the UX designers have done. Again, which would be usability testing, I guess. You're right. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, please give me that reference. Hmm. Is that a government out, or is it a separate meetup or something? That's something like that? Hmm. Right. Yeah. One of the things we're just doing some user testing now, and man, the users just hated the first couple of versions of what we did. But one of the next applications we'd like to build, we haven't decided yet, is sort of an open source mediation program that can be used, because there's a big problem with the criminal justice system, and that's that it costs too much money so that it's inaccessible to a lot of people, and if you take a mediation route or an arbitration route, sometimes that requires you to be at a location, and you have to get somebody to care for your kids, or you work at night, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's since one of our core competencies is not software development, it's actually mediation and dispute resolution. So we're thinking about doing that, but it dawned on us again that, if it's not a user-friendly experience, it's just not going to work. One of my favorite quotes lately is, if something that doesn't work, I don't know, what is it? Something that works but is ugly is, no, hold on. If it doesn't work but it's beautiful, it's ignored, all right? But if it doesn't work, yeah. If it doesn't work but it's beautiful, it's ignored. If it's functional and ugly, it's hated. So we need to be on the other side of that.
How's the transition to Firebase?
Firebase requires you to think about your data in an entirely different way, because for a bunch of reasons. It's a giant JSON object, right? You start at the top with the name of the database, and then everything is just you could actually do a call for that, and it'll spit out the entire database as a JSON object, or you can pick a subnode somewhere, right? So it's like a document database, like a CouchDB. Except it doesn't have some of the search routines. And then the fact that it's constantly updating is a bit of a trick. For instance, we had I set up a console log to find out what was going on with my data in my client once. And I was thinking HTTP. I was thinking I'm doing a request to Firebase and it sends me this response. Well, it was a big data cloud that I was sending. And I ended up with a console log event for every key value pair. So I'm not, the internals of the thing, it actually sends the data in different ways, and your data structure has to be redone, so you need to think about it. There's some queries it doesn't do, but you can do if you make up a custom field. So, it doesn't apply to every single use case, but man, what it does do, it does really well. So like we're sitting here, one of the things we want to do is in a lot of our case management systems, we have to send a receipt to the arbitrator, right? Because the arbitrator is saying, this is what I did, I want to be paid, right? Or I'm submitting this report. And they don't think our software is honest all the time. So we need to send them a receipt. This is what you submitted. We haven't approved it yet, but this is what you submitted. And in the old App Engine, it was easy. We would just, we just went to the email service and sent it out to them. But now if we're connected up to Firebase and they're just putting their report directly into Firebase in real time, each time they check a checkbox, it updates, right? But we need to send them that email when they're done. So actually what we've decided to do is to have a data node in the Firebase that says this guy gets an email, and we're going to set up a cron job running fairly quickly in the App Engine, and it can access the Firebase as a user, and it's going to check and say, oh gosh, I have to send an email. So once we found you could access Firebase from the App Engine, and that opened up basically all of the App Engine services as something we could integrate with Firebase. Sometimes you have to jerry-rig it a little bit.
You weren't going to use Firebase to be able to get a list of receipts so they could on demand get it when they got there?
Well, no, I don't know why they wouldn't. I mean, they should just believe the damn software, in my opinion. I told them, no, what I wanted to do was print report button in the client and just let them print it on their own paper. But apparently, we need to send them an email, because that's so much more credible than printing the report themselves.
Having both sides may be useful, because that lost email bill, what was last year? I don't have one.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Any other questions? All right, good enough. Thank you very much.